My mother's hand shot across the table with a speed I'd never seen before. The sound of the glass being snatched from my hand made everyone in the room stop. For a second, the noise of conversations, silverware, and Easter laughter faded. She was pale, her eyes wide. "Don't drink that," she repeated, trembling. I stared at her, uncomprehending. It was just grape juice, or so it seemed. An ordinary glass left by one of my cousins, I thought. But the way she gripped the glass, as if preventing something serious, froze me inside. She looked around, searching for something, or someone, and said, more quietly, "Follow me, now." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the entire family's eyes on us. My aunt and uncle stopped eating. My cousins whispered something. My stepfather tried to smile as if nothing had happened, but the tension was thick. I followed her into the kitchen, and when she closed the door behind us, I realized this was serious. She locked the door. She turned to me, the glass still in her hand, and took a deep breath. "You have no idea what almost happened." I tried to speak, but my voice failed. She continued, "That cup wasn't for you." Her hands were shaking so much that the liquid in the glass almost overflowed. And that's when I knew something was very wrong in that house. Share this story to reach further. Subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. She placed the glass in the sink, turning the tap water over it, as if trying to put out an invisible fire. The purple liquid ran down the drain, mixed with the nervousness that filled the kitchen. I stood there, waiting for answers, my heart racing. She wouldn't look at me. She stared fixedly at the sink. "Someone put something here. Something very wrong," she said. I was speechless. My mother wasn't one for exaggerations, never had been. She was always calm, controlled, the kind of woman who resolves things quietly, without drama. But there, she seemed different, and that scared me more than anything else. "You need to tell me what's going on." The sentence came out like a request, a plea, and yet she hesitated. She ran her hand through her hair, bit her lip, and finally sat down at the kitchen table as if her legs could no longer support her weight. "You weren't the one who was supposed to drink that, but I can't tell you who was either." The silence became unbearable. I couldn't think straight. I started thinking about everyone in the house. My uncles, my cousin's boyfriend, even my stepfather. Who would put something in a glass and leave it on the table like a trap? And worse, who would be the target? My mother? Me? Someone who was in the room at that moment? She stood up slowly and whispered, "Promise me one thing. Don't tell anyone this happened. Not yet. Give me 24 hours. And if after that you still want to know everything, I'll tell you. But for now, pretend nothing happened." I wanted to protest. I wanted answers. But faced with the fear on her face, I just nodded. I returned to the living room, trying to appear natural. The clatter of silverware filled the room again. But something had changed. I was observing everything with different eyes now. Every laugh seemed forced, every movement calculated. And my mother? She returned a few minutes later, smiling, a smile that didn't touch her eyes. She passed me and whispered, "Stay close to your Aunt Deborah. Just watch." I couldn't even ask why. I just went. I sat next to my aunt, who was busy with her phone. She looked at me, kissed me on the cheek, and went back to texting someone. But something about her seemed off. Aunt Deborah had always been affectionate, but now she seemed disconnected, distant. I noticed how she glanced toward the kitchen frequently. And even stranger, she didn't touch her own wine glass. She just stirred it with her hand, as if waiting for something. And that made me alert. During dessert, my mother discreetly pulled me away again. She led me to the back room. There, she closed the door and finally began to speak. "Someone poisoned that glass, son. I know the smell. I know it. And it wasn't an accident. It was done intentionally." My skin crawled all over. I wanted to laugh, to say it was crazy, but I couldn't. She looked at me with a look I had never seen on her before, a mixture of pain, fear, and hatred. I don't know if it was meant for me, but I suspect it was. And if it wasn't you with that glass, it would be me, or your aunt. I asked, "But why? Who would do that?" And she responded with a sentence that froze me. "Someone who wants to hide a secret. An old secret." My mother opened a drawer in the old cabinet and pulled out a weathered brown folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, letters, and copies of documents. She placed it on the bed and said, "You'll understand, but you have to promise to stay calm." I sat down, took a deep breath, and opened the first envelope. It was a newspaper article. Title, family involved in mysterious disappearance in the 90s, and there was my grandmother's name. Beside it, a black and white photo of her and her husband, my grandfather, a man I barely knew, whom everyone said had died in an accident. But the article told a different story. The article discussed open investigations, anonymous complaints, and a possible escape. The suspicion was that my grandfather had done something serious that the family had covered up. It didn't say exactly what, but the reporter left something dark in the air. Authorities believe the case involves something much bigger than a simple disappearance. My mother closed her eyes and began to explain. Your grandfather had enemies. He did bad things. And when he disappeared, many people kept quiet. But someone in the family knows what happened, and they're afraid the truth will come out. I asked, and does this have anything to do with the cup? And she replied, all. It was at that moment that I understood that Easter lunch wasn't just a family gathering. It was a minefield, and someone inside was ready to silence anyone who got too close to the truth. I looked at my mother and could only ask, who? But she didn't answer. Yet, when we returned to the living room, I noticed the mood had become more tense. Conversations seemed fragmented, and many people avoided eye contact. My mother approached the sink again, stirring the dishes, and discreetly slipped something into my pocket. I thought it was strange, but followed her advice and didn't look at it right away. I waited until I was alone in the hallway before pulling out the paper. It was a hastily written note. Meet in the shed behind the house at 9 p.m. Don't say anything. My stomach churned. I knew if this came from my mother, it was no joke. But what made me uneasy was, it had no signature. The rest of lunch dragged by. I observed every detail. Who was talking to whom? Who was avoiding the kitchen? Who was staring at their watch too much? Sometimes I'd catch my mother's eye, and she'd only make a barely perceptible gesture to remain calm. I tried, but the nervousness was like a weight on my chest. At 8:45 p.m., I pretended I was going to the car to get my coat. I left through the side door and walked to the shed, which sat at the end of the yard, partially covered by tree branches. The porch light didn't reach there. The air seemed cooler in that corner of the property. And as I approached, I noticed a shadow inside the shed. When I opened the door, I smelled dust and oil, and there was my mother, holding a wooden box. She whispered, quickly, before anyone notices, and she placed the box in my hands. I asked her what it was. She simply replied, the key to understanding everything, but also the reason why someone wants to silence us. Inside the shed, with the door ajar, I opened the box. Inside were 3 objects: an old glass bottle filled with a yellowish liquid, a gold chain with a medallion, and a thick envelope. The medallion contained a photo of a woman I didn't recognize, and the envelope was sealed with wax. My mother looked around before speaking. This belonged to your grandfather. And if anyone finds out you're with us, they won't stop until you recover. What you have inside is the reason for all the silence. My mind was racing in 1,000 directions, but before I could ask more, we heard footsteps outside. She motioned for me to be quiet. The shadows of 2 people appeared through the crack in the door. I couldn't make out who it was, but I heard a man's voice say, "Are you sure you're here?" Another voice answered, "If it isn't, we'll make it so." Feel your blood run cold. We waited until the sound of footsteps faded away. My mother carefully opened the door and whispered, "Don't say anything about the box. Not to Aunt Deborah, not to your stepfather. Tomorrow, I'll tell you everything." And as we walked back to the house, I realized that night wasn't going to end peacefully. I was holding something that could change everything. The house was already silent when I went to my room, but sleep wouldn't come. The box was hidden under my bed, and every creak in the woodwork made me more alert. Around 2 a.m, I heard slow footsteps in the hallway, paused, as if whoever was walking didn't want to be heard. I peeked through the crack in the door and saw a shadow standing in front of my room. My heart raced. The doorknob turned slowly, but didn't quite open. Then the footsteps continued, heading toward my mother's room. Seconds later, I heard the sound of something hitting, a dull, muffled impact. I ran out and found my mother lying on the floor, still conscious but dazed. She whispered, "He wanted to know where he was." I asked who. She just said, "Don't trust him." Before I could ask more, lights came on in the hallway. It was my stepfather, wearing a robe, his expression too worried to be real. He asked what had happened. My mother, breathless, replied, "I tripped," but her look at me said something else. "Don't talk." I helped her up and we carried her to the bedroom. My stepfather stood in the doorway, watching. as if trying to gauge our every reaction. And in that moment, I suspected. Perhaps the danger had been inside the house all along. The next morning, before everyone woke up, I went to the kitchen to get some water. I passed through the living room and saw my stepfather's phone on the table, unlocked. I don't know what made me stop, but I opened my recent messages. At the top was a conversation with a no-name number, just a strange string of digits. The messages were short but chilling. It didn't work today. She was suspicious. And the answer, tomorrow is the last chance. The rest, you know. My heart pounded in my throat. I quickly took a screenshot and put the phone back. Minutes later, he walked into the room, saw me, and smiled as if nothing had happened. I ran to my mother's room and showed her the photos. She remained silent, clutching her phone tightly. "I knew," she murmured. When I asked if she was going to confront him, she said, "Not yet. We need to finish what we started." And he pointed to the hidden box. We decided to open the wax-sealed envelope. Inside was a stack of old photos, all black and white. In them, my grandfather was seen alongside armed men and nervous-looking women. On the back of one of the photos, a note, proof, only use if necessary. And at that moment I understood that what we had in our hands was more dangerous than we imagined. Late that morning, my mother went out to buy bread, but before she went, she left the box with me. "If I'm not back by noon, you take this and get out of here. Go straight to Aunt Martha's house. She'll know what to do." Her tone was cold, calculated. It was as if she were already preparing for the worst. Time passed slowly. 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11. And then, at 11:45, I heard a car pull up in front of the house. I peeked out the window. It wasn't my mother's car. It was a black sedan with tinted windows. 2 men got out, looked around, and knocked loudly on the door. My stepfather answered. They spoke quietly, but I could hear them. "We have to solve this today." My stepfather nodded and opened the door for them. Hidden in the hallway, I held my breath. One of the men was holding a briefcase. The other, he seemed armed, and I knew it was no coincidence. I wondered, what if they knew I had the box? Cold sweat ran down my forehead. One of them looked toward the hallway and took a step forward. I backed away, nearly tripping. That's when I heard my stepfather say, "He doesn't know anything." The sentence didn't relieve me. It made me feel like I was in the center of a trap. I ran to my room, stuffed the box into my backpack, and got ready to climb out the window if necessary. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. But one thing was certain. If my mother didn't return soon, I would have to act alone, and fast. The sound of a car made me freeze. I looked out the window. It was my mother. She came out with an expression that mixed anger and relief. She entered through the front door, interrupting the men's conversation with my stepfather. "You have no business here." Her voice cut through the air like a blade. One of the men tried to argue, but she slammed the door in their faces. They stood outside for a few seconds, exchanging glances, before getting in the car and driving away. My stepfather, with a fake smile, said, "That was an exaggeration." She didn't answer. She walked straight past me and came to my room. "We need to get out of here. Now." That was all she said. She packed some clothes into a small suitcase and grabbed her backpack with the box. In the car, on the way to who knows where, she started talking. "They're not after money. They're after the photos. That proves a crime that was never solved." I asked why we didn't just go to the police. She looked at me with an expression that said more than words could say. Because they are in the police too. My stomach turned. I realized we were more alone than I'd thought, and that Easter, which had begun as a simple lunch, was now a race for survival. She sped up the car, and in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made me freeze. The black sedan was following us. The sound of the sedan's engine behind us was constant, like a threat breathing down our necks. My mother kept her eyes fixed on the road, but her hands on the steering wheel trembled slightly. The radio was off, and the silence was broken only by the sound of tires on asphalt. I tried not to look in the rearview mirror, but it was impossible. "They won't give up that easily," she said, pressing down harder on the accelerator. Trees and signs sped past the windows, but the car behind them remained at the same distance. Whether she sped up or slowed down, they kept pace. It was as if they wanted to remind us that we were being hunted. We took a side road, narrower and lined with empty fields. My mother knew this was risky. Less traffic meant fewer witnesses if something happened. I clung to the seat, trying to think of a plan. "There's a gas station about 15 minutes away," she said. "If we can get there, maybe we'll have time to lose it." But as we rounded a sharp curve, the sedan suddenly accelerated, closing the gap. The tension in the air was suffocating. I could already see the driver's face in the rearview mirror, a cold, unblinking expression, as if there were no rush, only certainty. That made me more nervous than if he'd been shouting or gesturing. My mother took a deep breath and said something that gave me chills. "If I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back, and you don't stop for anything." I wanted to reply that I wouldn't leave her, but the words wouldn't come, because for the first time, I sensed that perhaps she was preparing to say goodbye. When we finally spotted the gas station, it seemed like a mirage, but my mother didn't go straight in. She drove past the main entrance and parked behind the building, where almost no one else ever went. She turned off the car, handed me the backpack with the box, and looked me in the eye. "Go to the checkout, buy something and stay inside. I'll take care of this." I refused right away. "I won't leave you alone." But she insisted, "If they catch me, they'll want to know where the box is, and if you're not around, they won't find it." The logic was cruel, but it made sense. Even so, my hand was sweating as I gripped the backpack's zipper. I pulled into the gas station and stood near the liquor shelf, watching through the window. I saw the sedan pull up on the other side, the two men getting out and walking toward my mother. She stood firm, saying something I couldn't hear. One of them gestured, the other reached into his coat pocket, and my entire body went on alert. That's when I noticed a payphone in the corner of the gas station. Without thinking, I dialed the number my mother always told me to call in an emergency. A male voice answered, identifying himself as a private detective. I simply said, "They found us, at the gas station on Highway 43. He replied, "Stay where you are. I'm on my way." I looked out the window again. One of the men was already very close to my mother, his face leaning over hers. I knew that in seconds, something could happen, and if the detective didn't arrive in time, everything would change forever. My mother kept her chin high as the two men approached. The wind carried the smell of gasoline and hot rubber, and even from inside the store, I could feel the tension in the air. The shorter man in the leather jacket was speaking too softly for me to hear, but his abrupt gestures said it all. He wanted the box. The taller one, with a military haircut and a stony expression, stood back, watching her every move like a predator measuring the exact moment to strike. My mother didn't back down. I saw her lips move firmly, but the gleam in her eyes revealed she was calculating every second, every chance of escape. Suddenly, the man in the jacket tried to grab her arm. She spun around quickly, pushing him hard enough to knock him off balance. This made the other man take 2 steps forward, pulling something from his pocket, a metallic glint that made me freeze. My hand instinctively went to my phone, but the detective was already on his way. I needed to buy time. I ran to the cashier and asked the clerk to call the local police, but he hesitated, saying he didn't want any trouble. I almost jumped over the counter to grab his phone. The sound of my mother's muffled scream made me look outside again. She was leaning against the car, one of the men blocking her exit. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. If the detective didn't arrive within seconds, I would have to make a stupid decision: walk out and expose myself, or watch helplessly as they took my mother away. And deep down, I knew that if they took her away, there would be no going back. Out of nowhere, a silver car screeched to a halt at the side entrance of the station. It wasn't the detective, at least, not the one I expected. A man emerged from the vehicle, tall, wearing a gray overcoat and sunglasses, even in the bright sun. He walked toward the group with an almost provocative calm, as if he already knew everyone would stop and stare. The 2 men surrounding my mother turned to him. Something in their demeanor changed. It wasn't fear, exactly, but a recognition of territory. The man in the trench coat stopped a few steps away and said something that, even without hearing it, I could tell carried weight. It was as if he were dictating new rules in the middle of the game. My mother took advantage of the distraction to move a few inches away, but the man in the jacket held her back again, this time with more force. The man in the trench coat then pulled something from his pocket, not a gun, but a small black leather wallet. He opened it, quickly revealing a badge. My chest nearly burst with hope. The taller one swore and took a step back, but he didn't leave the scene. He seemed to be considering whether it was worth confronting. The one in the trench coat spoke louder, pointing directly at me inside the store. He knew I was there. My blood ran cold. How did he know who I was? How did he know I had the box? The moment was broken by the sound of sirens in the distance. The tension dissolved into rapid motion. The men retreating, my mother running toward me, the man in the trench coat looking directly at me as if to say without words, "You're not out of the woods. Not yet." The sound of sirens was approaching quickly, but the moment seemed to move in slow motion. My mother walked through the store door, pulling me tightly by the hand. I felt her fingers tremble, but there was no time for questions. The man in the trench coat was right behind us, keeping his eyes on us as if he were protecting us or monitoring us. Outside, the two men in the sedan were backing away with long strides. Their expressions weren't one of defeat, it was one of warning. They knew this wasn't going to end there. The man in the trench coat spoke to them quietly, and for a moment, I saw the taller man's eyes widen. Then, without another word, they got into the car and disappeared down the road. The detective arrived seconds later, a middle-aged man with a gray beard and sharp eyes. He put us in the back seat of his car and drove off. Only when the gas station was behind us did my mother finally speak. "He's not from the police. He's from an agency that investigated your grandfather, and now investigates us." The revelation hit me like a punch in the gut. The detective confirmed. "These photos in the box aren't just evidence of a crime. They link your grandfather and other influential people to a network that still exists, and they're desperate to destroy anything that might expose it." I looked at the backpack in my lap as if it were made of dynamite. It was heavy, on my body and on my conscience. We stopped at a secluded cabin surrounded by trees. The detective said we would stay there until he found a safe way to deliver the evidence. But before we went inside, my mother grabbed my arm. Her eyes were teary, and her voice cracked as she said, "I just wanted to protect you, but now, you're part of this." I understood. There was no going back. The box, the photos, my grandfather's story, everything was now my inheritance too. If you've watched this far, thank you, truly. Because this story isn't just about me and my mother. It's about what can happen when dangerous truths are buried for too long, and when ordinary people find themselves caught in the middle of them. Comment here where you are hearing this story from. I read every comment, and many of them inspire new videos. Tell me, what would you do in my place? Would you run with the box? Would you give it to someone? Or would you destroy everything to try to live in peace? Share this video now. Send it on WhatsApp, in a family group, in a work chat, to that friend who loves mysteries, or to that person you know values the truth. You have no idea how a simple share can open someone's eyes to situations happening around them. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell here. You'll hear stories that matter, that move you, that echo in your mind. Stories of danger, of survival, but also of courage, and how split-second choices can change entire destinies. And if nobody told you this today, let me say it. Your life matters. What you feel matters. And if you're stuck in a situation where there's fear, silence, or manipulation, know that there's a way out. There always is. It may be difficult. It may be dangerous, but no one deserves to live under threat. Until the next video, and remember, sometimes what seems like just a glass in your hand can hide the weight of an entire story.